name's Erin Coates. I'm the curator of In Cahoots, and I'd like to welcome you all here this evening to Fremantle Arts Centre. It's great to see so many people here on a Monday evening. So we opened In Cahoots on Friday and began with a really warm welcome from Matt Maguire, acknowledging that we stand here on Noongar country. So I'd like to reiterate again that we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So this special forum that we are holding is on the occasion of In Cahoots. And it seemed like this was a really timely and sort of perfect occasion on which to unpack some of these issues and ideas around collaboration between Aboriginal artists from different regions in Australia and between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal artists, and to really look at what is involved in collaboration and to not just celebrate it but to also critique it and really kind of open up that conversation. So we're very lucky to have such a fantastic panel to be able to join us this evening. And this evening we're going to have facilitation from Alison Page, who comes all the way from Coffs Harbour. So Alison is a descendant of the Walbunja and Wadawurrung people. She's an award-winning designer and creative director of the Aboriginal design studio Zach Page. And for 8 years she was also a regular panellist on the ABC program The New Inventors. So some of you may recognise her from that. She's also the chair of the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence in Redfern. And she was also inducted into the Design Institute Australian Hall of Fame. So welcome, Alison. Thank you for coming over.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So I'm going to hand over to Alison now to introduce the rest of the panellists, and there'll be some time at the end to hear from you if you have any questions for them. So thank you very much for coming.
Thanks very much. And thanks very much, Erin. I too would like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Noongar country tonight and to acknowledge elders past and present. It's such a wonderful setting for tonight. I asked Erin earlier, what was this place before? She said, it used to be a lunatic asylum. But I was like, wow, well, this is a very beautiful lunatic asylum and a place where I hope, we leave sanity behind tonight. So I'd like to thank the Fremantle Arts Centre for hosting this event here this evening. It promises to be a very dynamic discussion. We've got 7 very prominent artists and practitioners on the stage here tonight, some of them involved in Cahoots and some invited, and we'll be inviting the audience to fully engage, I think, to try and unpack, just where we're at, in the Australian art scene around collaboration, particularly between, the types of collaborations that we've seen in Cahoots, which are incredibly experimental. Yeah, so In Cahoots, what do you get when you send 7 artists to collaborate with 6 Aboriginal art centres in regional and remote communities all over Australia for a period of 18 months? You get In Cahoots, that's what you get, which is an absolutely amazing exhibition that opened this weekend here at the Fremantle Arts Centre. If you haven't seen this exhibition yet, you've got to do yourself a favour, just drop everything and go and see it. The way it's actually being curated as well as a journey from this room over here to the end room over there is absolutely stunning. It's actually a sort of a woven story in itself. But really, I'm sure you'll agree when you see these artworks that they really push the boundaries of where Aboriginal storytelling is right here and right now in Australia today. It's a very diverse range of art with one thing in common. They were all born out of collaborations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists, between urban artists and remote communities, and between remote artists living on opposite ends of the country. To quote curator Erin Coates, In Cahoots was an experiment of sorts in cross-cultural collaboration. But like all experiments, not all experiments go to plan. Some of these artists faced huge personal and professional challenges. Sorry, I just looked over there at Luiz immediately. From washed out roads, flat tyres, extreme weather, as well as the logistical challenges of making, producing, manufacturing and negotiating creative outputs with a huge amount of collaborating artists within the communities themselves and the art centres, across vast distances in remote locations, blood was literally spilt in this exhibition. What do the results of this experiment actually tell us? How is the tension between cultures being resolved? Is it being resolved? What does it tell us about the Australian art scene, or indeed the state of the nation? What is at stake in cross-cultural collaboration today? And to give us an insight into this question, please welcome our esteemed panellists, some of the artists from In Cahoots, and all esteemed Australian artists and practitioners. Please welcome first Tony Albert. Born in Townsville and now living in Sydney, Tony is a descendant of the Girramay, Yidinji and Kuku Yalanji people. In his arts practice, he's used a wide range of mediums, including painting, photography and mixed media to explore Aboriginal and Australian history, often incorporating elements of kitsch Aboriginalia. In 2014, Albert was awarded the Basil Sellers Art Prize and the Telstra National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art Award. I would actually literally be here just about all night if I kept rattling off his many awards and his many commissions, so I'm not going to. But Tony for In Cahoots was invited by the Warrakoona artists in WA to collaborate for In Cahoots. Please welcome Tony Albert.
Thank you.
Next we have Curtis Taylor, who was on a panel with me last week. So, you know, I said to Curtis, we've got to stop meeting like this. But Curtis is a filmmaker, artist and a young Martu elder who moves between his traditional lands in Martu country and his home here in Perth. He's worked on a number of film and multimedia productions, including Lynette Walworth's celebrated VR work Collisions, which has just received an Emmy Award. He has been involved in some of the most seminal collaborative exhibitions, such as the Canning Stock Route and We Don't Need a Map here at the Fremantle Arts Centre. He's also won a string of awards here and overseas. And for In Cahoots, Taylor has created a new collaborative body of work with Yolngu artist Ishmael Marika, who's in the audience with us tonight. Please welcome Curtis on stage and Ishmael in the audience. Also, Ways Hazleton is an Adelaide-based artist, head of studio at the School of Art and Architecture and Design at the University of South Australia. Her sculptures and installations incorporate a diverse range of materials, often considering their intrinsic properties to create unlikely relationships between different objects. She has exhibited extensively in Australia and worked most recently in Berlin, where I understand some of the work for In Cahoots was physically made. For In Cahoots, Hazleton was selected by the Papalankacha. I'm going to get that right. Geez, I can't tell you, I rehearsed that about 25 times and I got it wrong. Great for the camera. Hi, recording, good. To work with them on creating a new set of sculptural works. Please welcome Luiz. Trent Jansen is an artist and designer specialising in contemporary object making. The objects and furniture Jansen designs are richly symbolic, exploring the identities of specific individuals, families and communities. His recent research has focused on creature mythologies and the potential for cultural exchange between indigenous and European myths. Yeah, we like European myths. There's a lot of them. Jansen's exquisitely designed and crafted objects utilise both raw and fabricated materials and are held in major collections. For In Cahoots, Trent was invited by the Munkatja Arts Resource Centre in Fitzroy Crossing to collaborate. Welcome, Trent. And from the Munkajja Arts Resource Centre, please welcome Ways Macelli, who's been the studio coordinator there for 4 years. Prior to that, he was at the arts coordinator for the Narrajara and Pitjantjatjara lands of Central Australia. In his current position, he has a hands-on role working with the artists very closely and assisting with new projects, including the creation of collaborative artworks. Macelli is also a practising artist in his own right, recently exhibiting with Munkajja artist Prince Sidden, in Sharks and Shamans at the PS Art Space in Fremantle. So please welcome Wes. And also on our panel tonight are two artists who are critical voices in the Australian art scene. I'll introduce them both, Bindi Cole Chocka and Vernon Ah Kee. Bindi Cole Chocka is a Melbourne-born photographer, new media artist, writer and curator with both Aboriginal and Jewish heritage. Chocka's work spans photography, video, installation and text, and often references her life story and experiences, such as her heritage, the importance of Christianity in her life, and the impact of politics, the law, and other power structures on her lived experience and that of her family and community. She has exhibited in Australia and internationally and was famously one of the 9 people who successfully sued columnist Andrew Bolt for breaching the Racial Discrimination Act. I knew that would get an applause. And Bindi's now got 2 little kids and is writing her PhD at Deakin University. Please welcome Bindi. And last but not least at all, Vernon Ah Kee, who is a Brisbane-based artist and a member of the Kuku Yalanji, Waanji, Yidinji, Kuku Yalanji and Gugu Yimithirr peoples. Thank you. Aki didn't know. Well, he didn't applause. I didn't get it quite right. Anyway, Ah Kee's arts practice spans text-based works, drawing, photography and installations, which form a critique of Australian culture from the perspective of the Aboriginal experience of contemporary life. He's one of the founding members of the indigenous art collective Proper Now, giving urban-based Aboriginal artists a voice. He's exhibited at the Venice and the Istanbul Biennales and countless exhibitions here in Australia. Please welcome Vernon Ah Kee. Thank you. Thanks very much. I really have high inclusion needs, so if you could applaud me, that would be great. Tony, I'm going to start with you, and I'm just going to start by hearing from some of the In Cahoots artists just about their experiences. Tony, what were your first thoughts when you first got the invitation to go out to Wadawurrung?
For me, I was super excited. The opportunity to collaborate for me is like the essence of life. It's so important to be able, to be able to travel this country, and I've been able to collaborate internationally as well. But the opportunity to work with Aboriginal people, I think, is amazing. To know that the community had a range of people to select from and specifically invited me after seeing my work and through consultation and talking together. And I guess as my career has grown and I've grown as a person, these kind of opportunities I'm finding, more and more important. The opportunity, I think, for me to learn more. So the opportunity was really welcomed and well received.
So you punched the air, basically.
Absolutely.
You were thrilled.
I was so excited.
And so when you went out there, obviously, in cross-collaborative projects, they've asked for you, so they sort of know who you are. So that's a big part of the barrier that's been broken down already. You're not a complete foreigner. Mm-hmm. But did you find that you had to build trust, and how did you go about that?
Absolutely, there's an idea of building trust, but my initial response and the response with any collaboration for me was at first point asking the community what they wanted, and that's what do you want is a question that is not asked enough of Aboriginal people in any given circumstance, particularly then in looking at rural and remote areas. And I am fortunate enough to be in a position also where I could kind of sacrifice my own practice and, even a fee or anything like that to know I'm just wholeheartedly here because this community wants me here. So what do you want out of me and how can we achieve that
And what did they say?
They wanted to play bingo. So I took a bingo machine with me. No, they wanted to look at social and political.
Like one of those things.
Yeah.
And did you yell out,
Of course I did, yeah.
And did you have the, 22 didgeridoo?
We were...
Or two little ducks?
I almost planned an idea of creating Aboriginal bingo calls because I'm an avid bingo player myself, so I really understood the need and want to have bingo out in the community. But it was a way of... I didn't want to go to a community of 180 people and just engage with the artist. I wanted to engage with the entire community, and I think it's reflected in the show. You can see by the list of artists and collaborators, there's people that came into the Arts Centre that even the art advisor had never even seen in the community before. It was... I was intent on making the most out of the opportunity, but for the community get the most out of the opportunity too. So it was listening to what they wanted by me being there and me facilitating that. So I was fortunate. I took 2 assistants with me. And again, that was, I sacrificed my own fee to take 2 other people out and pay for them to come with me. But again, I feel so privileged to be in a position to be able to do that.
And what were they doing?
One was a documentary photographer, filmmaker, and non-Indigenous, and the other was an Indigenous architect student from Sydney who has assisted me throughout maybe the past 5 years at various times as a studio assistant, and I was very aware of, I think, an opportunity for him to be able to come out to a remote community as well. And that's, again, in that idea of collaboration, and a huge part of who I am and what I do is looking for other opportunities in connecting people and I mean, giving people this opportunity and gift to be able to work with other people.
Yeah. So I've just gleaned in 5 minutes that you just love people.
I do.
Yeah. But you and it's obvious in the work. I mean, it's so plentiful for a start. You were so prolific. And so it's obvious that you really immersed yourself in the community. But how close, can you get too close?
Yes.
Sorry,
No, I mean, to be really honest, I have worked with other communities over the year, going back nearly 2 decades, and sometimes they become family through cultural senses and responsibilities and ideas. I have people that are called brothers and sisters that are not biological brothers and sisters. There are people that I support on a number of levels that call me daily. And as I've grown as an artist and a person too, I've realized how the importance of collaboration, but also, I don't want to be in those positions anymore. Where
you got to manage expectations.
You do. And, and I've learned from that, and I'm not withholding or don't feel bad about the relationships I do have, which are much more, now family, that aren't technically family, and because that's great, and I've loved going like that. But I think there is a moment where you can cross the boundary, and it becomes too close or too incestuous or something like that.
Yeah,
but
and do you think the work could suffer for that in some ways?
I don't know if the work suffers from that. I think individually people suffer, particularly with things like finances and people becoming reliant or independent or dependent on you, I should say. Yeah. So that can happen as well. So it's it's just finding the right way of working, and I think it's something I've gotten better at as someone who gives a lot and loves to do these things.
And you think you got it right this time?
I think it's reflective in the work. I think it's reflective in the relationship we have now as a community and someone from outside the community. I feel like if I had maybe an independent project where that was contained, I would love to go back to Warrakoona and just do my own work but be immersed in the
there.
community, along with a number of other places within Australia and internationally. So it's finding...
Because you found your inner desert self as well.
I felt like maybe I was born in the wrong part of the country.
It's not actually rainforest or salt water.
I was running around. Wadawurrung is a place where hunting is still very much a part of life in terms of survival. And I was running around the desert with a crowbar, knocking goannas over the head, and
you just
felt
things. Totally at home.
I did. I just had the best time and was so welcomed by the community. And it was interesting here on a panel talking about this word. Yamaji, which it's about together and mutual benefits and things. And I took the ladies op shopping on the weekend, and they say, we take you hunting and you take us op shopping. And that is the greatest. I am the greatest hunter in the op shop world. Yeah. But it's a way of let's do it together. Respect. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that can relate to that. The rush that you get when you get that thing that you've caught. Curtis, so you went from the Western Desert up to Arnhem Land to work with Ishmael Marika, who's a filmmaker. You're both filmmakers. What were your expectations? Like, what were you, when you got the phone call about this project and you knew who you were going to work with, did you think, oh, this is amazing, finally, the Western Desert and Arnhem Land come together? What were your thoughts?
At first really excited to go up and work with Ishmael, because we've shown work together in a show curated by Brooke Andrew at the MCA a few years ago. I haven't met Ishmael before then, but I did at a remote media festival in Lombardino, Wadawurrung, and I was really excited to go up there to Arnhem Land, because coming from the Western Desert, used to more seeing flat landscapes so I can recognize where I am, whereas up there it's more dense rainforest that I couldn't find my bearings around the country and I didn't know where I was going. And
I know, we were commenting as well on the culturally inappropriate flesh-coloured microphones.
I was really
this new country.
Yeah, new country, and it was really awesome going out from Yidakala and Nulumboy, the township that travelling out to the homelands like Yilpra and Boimar, places where Ishmael's family have a deep connection to, and where a lot of our inspiration for the work came from, like the sand sculpture on the floor, the spears, and I was really excited to work with Ishmael after following him for a long time and his work, and also the works that the Mulka Project does with community and youth in the community. Because I started out working in community artwork across the Pilbara regions early on, and then here in the southwest with Cairn, WA, and country arts through Narrogin and the wheat belt in here in the metro area. So it was.
And so you had your, you had your expectations, but how, 18 months is a long time. How did it actually pan out? Did it go very well?
Not as what I would like the show would have been. In the room, there's more works done by me, and maybe 3 or 4 works done by Ishmael. But it's still a collaboration in our minds that we shared ideas that it's made by all of us, not just me and Ishmael, but other collaborators that I work with from 2-3 years ago to now.
Yeah.
So, but now I'm happy. But
what would you do differently?
Oh, I'd
because it was obviously
I had a set ideas of what I wanted when I went up there to Arnhem Land that I really wanted to kind of attack, Yolngu ideas and Western Desert ideas and kind of dissect it and completely fuck it up in all different ways. That I really was thinking about it really seriously. That just to kind of peeling back, how we connect to different stories and objects and land and places in the country. So I really wanted to do that in some way.
So do you think you were too polite?
No. Oh, I guess, yeah.
Like held back a bit?
Yeah, held back a bit. And I guess, it comes with... I couldn't have done that without having the trust, without the whole community.
Yeah.
I had that with Ishmael and our family. Now we're brothers, that he welcomed me and I welcomed him to the Western Desert. But kind of in that respect, kind of... for the community and for different people's moiety or songlines or their culture, I felt kind of held back.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to kind of attack those ideas and
So do you reckon if you had the opportunity again, you'd be a bit pushier?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I feel where that's where I'm at and where I will be heading towards. Yeah.
Yeah. So look out. Just deal with the consequences later. It'll fix itself later or whatever. Yeah. But that's part of the tension, I think, when you're collaborating is, it's about human relationships.
Yeah.
And, we go through that period of wanting to be respectful and wanting to show, who we are and what our values are. But, I think
it's okay to get in trouble as well.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, and, I felt that way. I don't know about Ishmael. Maybe give him a little bit of time to respond, I don't know, to that same kind of feeling that I had. If you know.
Do you think he could have been pushier and not got into trouble, Ishmael? I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll come back to that. Yeah. But Luiz, I know... I want to hear about what your expectations were when you got the phone call versus what actually happened.
I guess I didn't know what to expect, really. I was a bit unsure about what I was going into, not having had a great deal of experience out in the community before. So I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, I suppose. I mean, the first thing I did was got out the Google Maps, thought, where is Papalancature exactly? Never having heard of it before. So I kind of soon realised that it was, quite remote and it would be, resources, whatever, would be basic, which certainly... was the case in the end. I mean, I think, as you know, when I got there, I spent a week there in April in Papalancature and then went back for 3 weeks in October, November. And the first week was pretty quiet in terms of artists. There was a lot going on, so there weren't a lot of people around for the first few days, which was actually really quite good. I just kind of wandered around the community quite a bit, and it was quite an unsettled time in the community as well. So it was just a good opportunity for me to kind of get the lie of the land a bit at the beginning, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I thought it would be challenging. And I was right. It was challenging for me. It was a culture shock, I guess, for me, kind of going out into the community.
Yeah, but I mean, you were the obvious question is, about the Arts Centre and how important the Arts Centre is, really. Yeah. I mean, without the Arts Centre, you were just lost.
Yeah. The Arts Centre was, I mean, it seemed to me that it was a really important location in the community. It was mainly women that I worked with in the Arts Centre, and the women were in there, when they were in town, were in there every day. And it was a meeting centre, it was a refuge, it was a tea house, it was, anyone who come from out of town would come into the Arts Centre to find people. And it was it was a real focus. It seemed like a real focus.
And how did you just sort of broach... Hi, I'm here to do an artwork.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you know what I mean? How do you actually...
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, you feel like a bit of a
I know
for a while.
Got issues going on that are probably
Yeah.
a bit more desperate
Yeah.
than my artwork. But
Yeah.
anyway, how do you do that?
Yeah, it was pretty awkward, I guess, and it's interesting to hear about being polite. But I think that I was quite a bit standoffish for fear of actually saying something foolish or offending people, but it's going to happen anyway. So so I showed the artists there my work, but I had been invited into the community, so they had seen my work before. So we had a bit of a chat about my work and what they were doing, but actually, I think the thing that we did most was just kind of sat down together, which was great. We just kind of sat in the art centre and just, said nothing, said stuff. I think there was a lot of stuff that was going on, a lot of communication, which I wasn't really, didn't know what was going on, I think, a lot of the time. But I think actually just the fact that I was there sitting down, we were just doing things, we were kind of weaving to start with, or I was just cutting out some fabrics and bits and pieces. I'd bought some materials with me and there were some materials there already. So we just kind of sat down and just sort of started being with each other, actually. I think just kind of getting used to kind of sitting in the space together. Yeah.
And then it just, that feeling of comfortable just kept growing.
Yes, I think that's right, learning people's names, learning the dogs' names, all that kind of stuff was quite good.
Doing the dishes.
Yeah, that's right. Making cups of tea, became the tea lady instantly. Learning my name couldn't be said, so we had to give me a new name, so I learnt my name and just kind of sat down.
Right, good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll come back to you because there's more to that story. Trent, your work really thrives on that sort of intersection between cultures, and you're really interested in that kind of intersection. So how do you prepare yourself? So you must love these types of collaborations, but how do you prepare yourself for these types of projects, and how did you prepare yourself for this one in Fitzroy?
I mean, I do, but I don't think that you can prepare yourself. I don't feel like I can, because each collaboration and each place and each group of individuals is so different. That it's I find it's best to get a lay of the land when you arrive. Not to try not to have too many preconceptions and to kind of begin to understand things once you get there.
Yeah. And how did it sort of pan out for you compared to what you expected?
I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I've collaborated with a few, I suppose, different individuals, Indigenous individuals, Aboriginal individuals in the past, Tasmania and Central Australia, but never have I sort of been invited by a group to come and work, as I suppose, and collaborate with a whole kind of community of artists.
Yeah.
And I know that from before I had sort of left to go to Fitzroy, some of the artists that I was being introduced to by Belinda, the manager there, were some of their kind of more well-known artists. So Tommy May and Mervyn, and some of their artists that are exhibiting internationally and are quite well renowned for their work. Yeah. And I guess my preconception was, and I think in some ways Belinda and maybe Wes, I'm not sure, but were interested at first in me perhaps working with those artists. Because it just seemed to make sense, that I would go and work with those that had developed some renown and some practice. But I kind of quickly learned that those artists didn't want much to do with me because, I think the first time I went out there, Tommy was preparing for a big show, I think in New York, a couple of weeks after. And, what does he want with me? He's got his own thing going on. He's incredibly successful in his own, I didn't really have a lot to offer him and his practice, I don't think. He's incredibly, an amazing artist. And so I ended up, I suppose, as a result, kind of hanging out with the guys that were working in the workshop who work, I suppose, more as technicians generally, helping other artists to make art and, often making artifacts, kulamons and boomerangs and knives and, tools. And, because we sort of, I guess, bonded a little over the process of using machinery and tools, and I was also very interested in watching and learning through observing that process of making artifacts, that we bonded over that process. So in the end, I mostly ended up collaborating with those guys.
You gravitated toward the designers and the manufacturers.
Instead of those that I was maybe supposed to.
Yeah.
And I think that was actually beneficial on both sides. I think it gave those individuals an opportunity to explore their practice in a way they hadn't before, and it gave me the opportunity to work with people who were used to shaping materials and making artifacts that are particular to that community that I've never been exposed to before.
Oh, and I know, just on the supposed to part of it, I know in Cahoots set up this, the Fremantle Arts Centre set up, a sort of a protocol by which you should work by, and I'm going to actually ask Wes about that a little bit more in a minute, but I think it sort of kind of introduces this idea that there's this spectrum of collaboration, with transactions at one end where, you do this for me and I'll give you $500 or something, right through to co-authorship. And I think the idea for in Cahoots was that it was working towards co-authorship. Where do you think your collaboration sat on that spectrum?
I was definitely shooting for the co-authorship end of the spectrum. I think it sort of edged more and more towards co-authorship as we went, and through conversation with Wes and Belinda, and through, I suppose, developing ideas as to how we might practically work toward that, we're able to slowly edge toward that end of the spectrum. I think it started off with me probably playing a little bit too much of a leading role, I guess because I had some preconceptions of the kinds of things that I was interested as starting points, and only ever saw them as...
You've got a job to do.
Yeah, I mean, we had 6 weeks to make, to do a lot, to get a lot done, and I was always very aware from the beginning that there was a hell of a lot to do and not a lot of time. So I was very keen to kind of hit the ground running, but I only ever saw those beginnings as places to begin, and hoped that over time they would snowball and become more and more symmetrical in nature, and they did. Yeah. Over time.
Yeah. So, Wes, I mean, it's great that both of you are on the couch together because it's like it'd be great to hear from your perspective. You should have your head down because you're like, oh yeah, sure. No, no. But what are the protocols? Because you would have a lot of people, whether they're artists, you'd see a lot of government workers, all sorts of people coming in to the community to collaborate. What are the protocols, and what's this sort of? Do you have a kind of a? How do you brief artists on how to be in the community?
Well, Trent has been in communities before, so I can't. I didn't give him a 101. I think just introductions to people who you might be working with, or what people's personalities are like, and perhaps what to expect a little bit. But yeah, you're right. Within communities, you do see a lot of people. I mean, I've been there 4 years, thankfully, and I feel lucky for that. The word Gadia is used often for like a foreigner or a white person, and for a while I was thinking Gadia kind of means someone who's just here for a while and then goes again. And I mean, I'm sensitive to the fact of these people who are, like, the community there is so strong, like everyone knows each other, knows each other's histories, and you're really made aware of that's what you don't have, say, coming from where I was from. I haven't lived at home where I grew up. I actually moved around a lot as a child anyway. So it's you stand out if you're coming in as a new person, and then pretty much asking people a lot of questions because, like you say, you've got a job to do. I'm there because I'm working there. I've got a great job. But yeah, one of the protocols I would say is don't ask too many questions. right? Which is it's a conundrum when especially when you're trying to get something done in a short period of time. But it is it's not it's quite rude culturally to sit down with people that you don't know, that they don't know who you are, they don't know what relationship you should be having to them. So that's one of the things.
And is that because knowledge sharing is earned?
Look, I think it's
you get it when
you're supposed to get it. Look,
And
and again, I
weighing
haven't
here.
sat down and asked people why you don't ask questions. It's
Because that's a question.
it's just another question.
There it is.
So these are things that I've just I've thought about. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah. Sorry. I think I'm feeling really pushy right now.
Right. Look, because let's face it, like the time that this modern time that we're all adjusting to, that is, it keeps kind of just getting faster and faster, is in great contrast to the time that like say
The imperative to make a work for an exhibition that's on at a certain date.
Yeah. Like an actual day at a certain time of the year, in a certain month, not not next time it's hot.
Yeah, but I would have thought 18 months. Like, that seems like ages. Is it?
Well, it's almost too long. It's like, when's this project going to happen? Yeah, it's going to happen in a year and a half. Like, okay, well, let's just wait till it gets a bit closer.
But also, it's 18 months, but it's only 6 weeks together. 6 weeks actually being there together over the space of 18 months. It's 6 weeks to make, significant
so
work.
were you all there only for 6 weeks? Or
4.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like 2. Oh, no, sorry, 4. Ishmael was 2 weeks with me. But yeah, in that space of time, I felt I didn't have enough time with him and to make the work and stuff like that. A proper collaboration with both of us, but I went back home and kind of, did my own thing.
Yeah. So time is obviously one of, the important ingredients. Bindi, you've been involved in lots of collaborations. Share with us what you think are the ingredients for success. Is time one of them?
Definitely time. I mean, personally, for me, if I was never involved in a collaboration ever again, I'd be really happy. I absolutely respect and honour and see the worthiness of collaborations, but I find them extremely fraught and difficult. I think I'm probably neurotic enough. The last thing I need is a whole lot of other neurotic people around me, all trying to work together.
Why is that? Is that what really gives you the shits about collaboration?
I think that it's really tough working with a whole lot of different personalities. For a collaboration to work, there needs to be a leader. There needs to be one vision. And so I've had both really successful collaborations and really disastrous ones, to the point where I've lost relationships. I've not maintained friendships over a long period of time because
I never want to see you again.
Yeah, and we never have.
Yeah.
And so, and I think the ones that don't work were the ones where there was no real structure of who's leading the ship, who's steering things, and the ones that have worked have been where there's been a really clear vision, and that there's kind of one person's vision and everybody's working together to kind of outwork that.
Yeah. And is it important, do you think, to get that clarity of expectations, sort of, or terms of engagement, kind of written before everyone signs up to the project?
For me, it's really important, absolutely important, that everybody goes in with really clear expectations of who's doing what and who's responsible for what and what the outcomes might be too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think things can get just so messy, and boundaries can really be crossed easily. And especially as artists, we were talking earlier today, and we're trained to work by ourselves. All of our university training, our schooling, art school, it's all designed to work in a studio by yourself. We're not necessarily trained in team management and group skills and working in partnership with people. And you just kind of learn it as you go along, like Tony was saying, you know. I appreciate that he's each time getting better at that type of collaboration, and that's really good, because I don't think that we're given those skills. Yeah. We're taught those skills.
Yeah, I think it's, my background is in architecture and in film. I mean, and, you know, the idea of being able to make what you've created or what you've designed, to me, is amazing. So I think, you know, you're sort of spoiled in a funny sort of a way. But, yeah, I think moving into when you have to collaborate, I mean... you know, is it just a matter of suffering those people until it's over? You know?
Depends on the people, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. So, Vernon, you know, you've done collaborative projects, you've worked on your own, you do both. But I actually want to take the conversation just in a slightly different direction with you, Vernon. Here we go. Ready? He's holding onto the seat. Who's really benefiting from cross-cultural collaborations?
Well, I think the word collaboration is problematic. Beginning with, you know, what I think we've heard tonight, the people up here have described, you know, different kinds of engagement, different levels of engagement, different levels of cultural interaction that has all required a sense of facilitation and project management more than collaboration. I mean, collaboration suggests there is an aspect of equality, and if you're going to throw that word around, then you have to get down to the nitty-gritty where you're going to point at something and say it's either equal or it's not. You know, and talking about that idea of co-authorship, you know, one artist being a co-author with 30, you know, is that a good outcome when you're using the word collaboration, and collaboration has connotations of equality?
So what would...
So who benefits from that?
Yeah.
The 30 people or the single person?
Or the audience.
Or the audience, you know. So, I mean, I think In Cahoots is an amazing project, and I think there are lots of benefits to be had from it, and I think the sense and nature of engagement is really rich and vibrant. But then again, we've just gone over the problems that 6-week imposed time frame has had, and there are, like, I would think that if I was, the times when I've kind of worked with people, we've kind of got together after knowing each other for 20 years and said we should do something together, and then when we decide to do something together, it's like very slow and gradual, where it's this process of negotiation where you negotiate every decision and idea and agree on it. But you also come to it together as equals, and it helps if you're coming to it from the same context, both historically, politically, economically, socially,
But don't you want to create some sort of tension in the work? Isn't that good?
Look,
I use that example of Massive Attack, you know. That album, Mezzanine, is amazing, and they hated each other's guts while they were making it. Hated each other, but look at it. It's incredible.
I think I'd certainly like to... I felt that very keenly when I was in that community. I felt like things were inequitable. My coming in, I felt very uncomfortable. And in many ways, I think the art making was kind of secondary, or it was a byproduct or something of me just sort of sitting down and spending time with people. There seemed to be other things that were more important than sitting down making art at that time, I suppose, which kind of took over. So, the idea of equality, I think, is, I don't know, it's complicated. And I don't think it's just about the numbers. Like, I worked with, most of the works in there were working with me and one other person on them, but I don't think that's any closer to equity.
I mean, and you know, the idea of co-authorship is different to ownership.
And mentorship.
Yeah, and there's a you know, you can have a senior and junior relationship there. That establishes the power relationship between the two. Automatically, arbitrarily, at the very beginning. You know, and then you project what the end result is. Yeah.
And maybe you go into it with the idea of collaboration and co-authorship, but maybe it at times becomes more about a mentorship or even a sharing of your platform. You know, I think there's a lot of benefit for a lot of the artists that are involved because they get to work with their peers, they get a platform that perhaps they would not have had before. But is that really a collaboration, or is it a mentorship? Or
So perhaps it's more engagement. I mean, because, you know, that word just came in immediately after that there's various forms of engagement. And if you want to kind of equal the playing field, if you are a very established artist, you know, like you did, you sort of went into that community just going, well, what do you know, you handed over the control. Pretty much to the community. You relinquished your...
And my fee, and then in co-authorship, if it's 1:30, then it's a split of 30 equal ways, including me within that 30. Like, it's not I take half and then the other 30 take half off a sale price. Then if it's one person, it's divided by 1. If it's 2, you divide it by 2. If it's 30, you divide by 30. Co-authorship is about equality. And I think for my work, even with the children co-author every one of the works and have equal shares in the work. They will take, for any sales, exactly the same percentage as I am, as everyone. I think there are possible ways of co-authorship to exist that are successful.
Yeah, and I think, but maybe it's just that there is that spectrum. Yeah, Vernon, do you think? And do you think that...
Oh, there is.
Some projects which are transactional.
There is. I mean, walking through the show, I mean, and clearly, the end result, this exhibition that we have here in this building, has thrown up amazing kind of ideas of engagement, really. But you can walk into every room and you can get a sense of how strong the leadership has been on either side, and you can get a sense of how shared the ideas are from one room to another, and it's sometimes very, very clear. I mean, and that's I guess that's the point, really. Is that you're going to that this idea of equality doesn't really exist, that you're going to get these varying levels, even in individual objects, you know, and that's
and maybe it's not that, you know, we have this sort of picture that we should all just be all equal, and, you know, really this is about art making. Yeah, this is about art making, and it doesn't really matter behind the scenes if someone took control, you know, and actually, you know, directed it. And that could be someone from the community as much as, you know, the established artist. Wes, what do you think the community are getting out of these collaborative projects?
The art community, or
the artists that are involved in the art centre, how, you know, are they benefiting from these visiting artists coming out? And
yeah, I mean, I would say yes, they are.
in what way?
Well, I feel like they are. In different ways. I'd first think about the ways that they've been generous to maybe bend their own culture, I suppose, to allow people to come in and like I said, sort of sit down and ask questions. And
Yeah.
Even asking, I mean, if you're up in Fitzroy, people have come from being, colonised fairly recently in Australia's history, which was, it was brutal for much of that. And then there was this kind of, it wasn't there, stabilised period of stations, and then, you're known as a good guttier if you weren't killing people. And then interestingly, talking about equality, when equal pay rights came in, a lot of those people lost their occupation, I suppose, on the stations. They were removed from the stations. And so I'm aware of it. I'm aware every time that I speak to someone and say if they want to be involved in something, the nuance of me as a guardian saying, do you want to do this, or you're going to do this? Like I might say, do you want to be involved? And really, maybe they're thinking, well, have I got a choice to say?
Yeah.
Say no. I mean, I know. I'm asking them.
You're ask-telling.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
It must be somewhere like that,
Yeah.
because I'm sure they're thinking, I want them to do it. That's why I'm asking them.
Sure.
The consequences before of not complying were probably pretty severe. So, I mean, that's something I'm always conscious. Well, I try to be conscious.
But they are getting, are they like feeling energised by this new energy?
Oh, right. Getting back to your question, yeah. So, look. So,
is that subtle?
right. I look at my wado, my brother-in-law, Iliam, who has been there about as long as I have, and he kind of came into Munkajja. His father has worked there for 12 years. His sister works there. His grandmother was involved in this project. He comes from a very strong family, and he came actually. Iliam, I'm talking about, yeah. From high school, I think maybe year 10, he took a year off from high school down in Kalgoorlie. He came to work with us. Really enjoyed it, I think, and then went back to high school, finished off, came back again. And, I've really seen him grow, gaining confidence. He's travelled, he's got the ability to travel, and I think projects like this allow people to travel with their culture, not necessarily leave it behind.
Yeah, and so it can open up. And did all the In Cahoots artists get a sense that they had a bit of a responsibility to kind of open up those communities to your world, your arts world, or?
Yeah, I think for me,
what was your part of the giving?
Oh well, for me, I think I was wanted to, be more aware of kind of Yolngu culture, and in knowing there was a young filmmaker around about the same age working in film and telling horror stories, and that's what I was interested in. But yeah, when I don't know about Ishmael, but when I went into Northeast Arnhem Land, yeah, there was a kind of a power structure, and it wasn't kind of, somebody didn't come in and take control or anything, but it was kind of set in that I was a foreign person into Arnhem Land, and the workshops or the work that we made on the beach, like, for example, the spheres were led by Ishmael's father, and another spear maker, Yilpir. And, I think the same too when we were making spears in the Western Desert. It was more led by the old people, and in the Western Desert, I think for us is you're only allowed to make spears when you reach a certain status in the community or the region. And yeah, there was that kind of power structure, but I could feel it kind of automatically in those two different spaces, countries, and I think for the authorship, it's not my story, but I think the story is already set in the land and the people already, and it's just our kind of recreation or retelling or our kind of interpretation of that story, and yeah, and that's how I feel about all these kind of works here that in our room, that the works that I made about places that I visited for the first time, or stories that works that I shot a few years ago and still continue to build on. But yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
I think, for me from day one, it was the community being fully aware that I was there to work for them, not the other way around. And that, what they wanted to come out of having me there and out of everything I had to give or to think or to offer, it was the other way around.
Well, you put your lateral mind to it with the bingo machine.
Yeah, well, you get strategic about how you can infiltrate that.
Yeah.
But I didn't ever want anyone to think that I was there to take something from them.
Yeah.
That I was fully there to work for the community.
Yeah, because I'm sort of curious to know, like, with remote communities as well, like, do they actually even aware of the exhibition world? And I know with collisions, like,
I think I think the artists that have travelled down to the show or whoever works in the show, that they're aware, or the artists who are kind of coming in and out of the art centres, or kind of the art centre is their central place, that they're aware of the show. But with the works, I don't know. It's you'll have to ask them. It's a different story whether they know about these ideas that are being workshopped,
or feel that this
or
is
around,
this is the
or
important
that this
part.
is important. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, or is the what, say with collisions, it's sort of interesting with that work, Curtis, because the work itself had this important purpose about putting a spotlight on the bomb and the uranium mining that was happening in your country. Had an important currency to the work, but then all of this film festival stuff happened, and the Emmy Award, it just got really big. Like, was that hard for the community to kind of, reconcile? Was that important to them, that sort of stuff?
I think it was important for Nyari and Lynette to work on the project, who, that was the director and the protagonist in the story. I think that was important to them, and the people who came out and collaborated or worked on the project, from the sound people to the developers who had the cameras, and people behind the scenes with funding the project. For the whole region, I can't speak for the whole region or individual, but I feel like there was. It would have been done differently in terms of bringing more young people on the project. Even just getting the camera and shooting behind the scenes, or working with the sound person, learning about sound, or working with the camera operators, learning about the camera operators, or even being an attachment to the whoever's on the project. But I was an attachment to the director. That was cool. But I think coming from a film background. There's this thing where, the camera operator or the DOP within the project, if they're on a shoot, they kind of, spare some time, 1 day or 2 days, to kind of give to the attachment on the project, saying, okay, this is your day, this is your shoot, kind of direct however scene you want to lay out and shoot it, how you want to shoot it. Whereas on this one, it didn't happen like that. I guess because, they're not all, filmmakers or filmmakers. I think, for us to, I enjoyed the journey from, making the work to traveling and traveling with the two old people and traveling with the team. And I think I would like to do it differently, but yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so you all, it sort of goes to the I suppose it's about that negotiating again, that kind of partnership, like who's getting what out of what, and I think in the end, I just. But I want to know some of the practical issues that some of you faced in terms of materials and tools and logistics across remote locations, just to take a different tack. Luiz, how was that for you?
It was difficult for me. There were a number of art centre managers during the year or so that I was kind of, working with Papalankature. There were 5 people that I worked with over that period. So continuity in terms of the contact people was an issue. Conditions, resources, facilities were very non-existent. Basically, there was no tools. What was available there in the art centre was the paint and canvases that the artists were using, and we went and gathered some grass, and I bought raffia that we were using. So the pragmatics were kind of tough, I think. The conditions of the art centre were very basic, and I felt, it's interesting, the question of kind of, what you were giving back. I felt like, for me, what I did when I was there was actually just made myself useful, I think, in a number of ways. I helped, I spent some time stocking the shelves in the local store because it was chaos there and people needed to eat, so I just sort of helped out with that. Washed lots of kids who really, I thought, needed to be cleaner. So it was kind of tricky. I was a little bit, standoffish to start with, but after a while I think...
you just got pragmatic.
Pragmatic is absolutely the word. I got very pragmatic.
You pulled up your sleeves and just got to work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But I suppose that's, part of integrating yourself into the community.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So it was, and I guess in terms of the logistics of it, it was hard to predict when anyone was going to be around, and it was... it said 4 weeks is a very small amount of time, and I probably just spent, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days with the artists that I work with over that period of time. People, they weren't here on the weekend because there was a funeral, so there was another funeral as well. So there was obviously other commitments that took priority.
Sure. So did you, Trent, feel that, there was a genuine exchange? Because you had some artists come to your studio.
I did, yeah. Again, back to the kind of issue of time, we essentially ran out of time. So it was, and I didn't want to just take the work back to my studio and finish it there. And, I guess similarly, I didn't think it was symptomatic of as true as possible a co-authorship if I were to leave it there and for it to be finished. So we tried to kind of brainstorm a way that we could essentially get some more time together, but also bring in some more symmetry into the nature of the collaboration. So 2 artists, Johnny and Ilim Nagoda, came to my studio in Thirroul and worked with me also at the workshop at the university that I teach at in Wollongong. They came to my town. They lived in my town. It's
a pretty good town.
It's a lovely town. But we in the same way that I'd interacted with them and their families and their community in their town, they interacted with mine. You know, they came to our house for dinner and spent a lot of time with my partner and my daughter, and I organised a dinner with every local artist that I could on the first night that they were there to welcome them to the town. You know, sort of artist to artist. I did my very best to kind of show, you know, them the place where I live and introduce them to the place that sort of that governs my life, I suppose, in the same way that they'd done for me.
Yeah.
But kind of, you know, but in a very different way, because, you know, being introduced to country out there is about kind of being in the back of a troop and driving around looking for coolamon wood to cut down, and you know, being introduced to practices that are close to artifact making or the particular act of making things that we were engaging with together. And whereas, you know, coming and working with me is maybe more about going to Bunnings to get some materials, or
going down to Thirroul, to the local cafe at Thirroul.
Yeah, the local restaurant, or, you know, like walking around the bush at the edge of the university to try and find some branches that we could use for the frame of the chair that we're working on.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different kind of introduction. Because it's a different kind of place.
But is that part of the excitement? All those technical and logistical challenges, you know, like it made the work. I mean, you know, the materiality of your work, Tony, is kind of all about, you know, the availability of materials, just the very practical availability of materials. But you took tools, didn't you?
So many. I go very, very prepared. I take those divorce bags that are just full of
divorce bags
stuff. I don't know, those big stripy bags, divorce bags.
Divorce.
That's what people use when they get divorced. And you go in, not like, all my experience, I know the suitcase I take, even all the clothes I take, I'm not taking home with me. That's the level I go to in knowing when I go to a community. Like, when I leave just as me with the clothes I have on, and everything else gets left. And I mean, that's another one, you know, the amazing joy of it. But tools, equipment, paintbrushes, food, cigarettes, lollies. I just know how to get myself out of any situation.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm prepared for it. Yeah.
And you can get yourself out of a marriage as well while you're at it. So, look, I want to switch the conversation now to the audience, and not asking you questions just yet, because I want to go over to Bindi and Vernon and just talk a bit about Australian audiences right now. And but first to you, Bindi, do you actually care about the audience and what they think?
Probably not.
No. No offence.
Yeah. I mean, I think
what about this audience?
I really care about this audience.
Yes, she didn't mean you.
Yeah. I guess it's about different types of artistic practice. For me, my practice has always been a form of catharsis, of personal catharsis, where I use my art and my process as a way of reconciling things that are really uncomfortable within me. So it's very personal. It then just happens to tap into things that are happening socially at the time. And so because I'm trying to unearth tensions, often what I unearth is quite polarising or divisive, because they're things that might be controversial or taboo or unspoken. And so if I cared about the audience and that impacted my artistic process and what I was doing, the work wouldn't be the same for me. So I'm not making work for an audience. I'm making it to be sane, I think.
Yeah. Curtis, you're nodding. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I feel the same way for the blood piece on the wall. That I was nervous about, showing it to first my family and people from the Western Desert region, but then after that I was just like, let it go. And I was like, well, if I didn't have done that, then, I wouldn't have, felt the same way I feel about it now, and I feel really good about it.
Yeah, because you've come from, like filmmaking, it's like going into battle with an army of people. Like it's horrendous. I love it, but it's horrendous. But, and, it is by its very nature, extremely collaborative, you know, and very contracted period of time. You've gone
hierarchical too. Sorry, there's a very strong. There's always a leadership structure in making.
Incredible! That's why I say it is like going into battle, because it is. There's army generals and but you know, which gets it done.
Yeah.
But Curtis, you've made a massive shift in this work. From you're a shapeshifter, so you've gone from you know, these big collaborative projects, being on feature films, being on major, you know, quite high-end projects, film projects, to this work.
Yeah, I just kind of felt tired of making movies and wanted to work with my hands.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think it's kind of like, what's, you know, is it just a different part of the brain, or is it?
Yeah, and just wanted to leave that for a while and just, you know, work with my hands at something that, you know, that I can do every day, that, you know, relaxes me and, you know, becomes monotonous over a period of time, that, you know, I'm just not thinking about new stories that I'd like to create, you know, to put on the screen. But yeah, coming back to collisions, I think, you know, not kind of belittling or demeaning the whole kind of project and, you know, the meaning of that work has with not just Nyari and Madu people, but I think Yanangua, Pitjantjara, Yankunytjara, people who were affected by Maralinga and nuclear tests all over this country. But yeah, in terms of the filmmaking process, that I would have liked to do it another way. But yeah, I'll kind of put my voice in and tell, you know, the directors and the camera people that would like to involve more younger people and more people that I kind of have a little bit of experience in that field, that are already in the region making their work grassroots, you know, involving those kind of people. Yeah.
But I think that's, you know, it's a really interesting point that you're both raising there about collaborations. If, you know, it does potentially disturb the meditation that a solo visual artist is kind of having when they're making a work, or, you know, is it in your case, Tony, you can do that meditation side by side, you know, or be in that kind of headspace side by side. Yeah? Yeah. Good. I just wanted agreement on that. I wanted a consensus. But to the audience, I want to sort of get from you, Vernon, whether you think we're experiencing an increased interest in Aboriginal art in Australia now, whether you've seen that over the last few years. A renaissance of sorts, or a rebirth in sort of interest in Aboriginal storytelling?
I think there's an interest in Aboriginal storytelling. Is there an interest in Aboriginal people? Not really. But the interest is in Aboriginal storytelling because that's where the control is. I think. You know, I have lots of issues with Aboriginal art, the construction of Aboriginal art. You know, part of me wants to kind of mould it and investigate it a bit more, and part of me wants to break it all to pieces. I think Aboriginal art began, what we think of as Aboriginal art now, is essentially a white construction, and I think it's built on a false premise, and I think it should be you know, called out for what it is. I mean, if it was, you know, we are at a point now. What your question raises, the observation we should all be making is that we are at a point right now where Aboriginal art is being used to describe Aboriginal people. And this is a crazy circumstance because it should be exactly the other way around. Aboriginal people should be describing Aboriginal art. And the reason that we're in this crazy circumstance is because of anthropology, ethnography, academia, and white Australian art, which has been also very careful in its power plays to demarcate Australian art and by extension Aborigines from each other, and to establish levels of control that are very rigid right now. Australia's got a history of very, very careful management of its power relationship with Aborigines, and we see it played out in Australian art and Australian art's relationship with Aboriginal art, and I think we can all agree that Fiona Hall's Venice exercise demonstrated that emphatically.
In what way?
That it was about Fiona Hall and not the Aboriginal women that she was working with.
So it's really attribution. Again, back to that power play. So if you ramp up, if you rev the engine of Aboriginal art, as in there's more customers, customers for want of a better word, or people buying Aboriginal art and engaging in Aboriginal cultural experiences, there's more projects, there's more commissions. Like, if we can agree now that that's happening more, do you think, in the last few years, would we agree that?
You said a renaissance. When was the first birth?
Yeah. Oh, the 80,000 years before colonisation, potentially.
Right.
I think I'm from La Perouse, so I'm from ground zero for where culture was destroyed. So, is there, I know in New South Wales there is a revival of a lot of cultural practices, but I feel like I have noticed over 20 years of practice that there has been an increased interest from mainstream Australia, for want of a better word, in Aboriginal culture and art. And I just wanted to get your views on that. Is there or isn't there? Or do you think it's been the same? Vernon, you've been around,
Oh, well, but is it an increase in interest in Aboriginal culture and people, or just culture and art?
Yeah, just the nice parts. That's what you're saying.
How come when a form of Aboriginal art or a genre within the overarching scope of Aboriginal art becomes popular, we hear about this new abstraction, or this new kind of colour investigation, or this new kind of thing we call contemporary or modern, but we never hear about the people who actually make the work. We never hear about their lives, because we hear about the life that white artists have. I mean, they get to be on the covers of art journals, and they get interviewed about their lives and their actual practice.
So do you think that needs to happen more often, like more now, there needs to be more of a spotlight on?
Well, we should be
Aboriginal.
asking why it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
If Aboriginal art is so intrinsic to the way this country thinks of itself, which is what this country would have you believe.
Yeah.
Isn't it the biggest part of the art market, Aboriginal art, especially internationally?
Yeah. It's nearly double than the contemporary sales within Australia. We do. I'm not defending the art market. I'm kind of just sort of illustrating these kind of funny situations what happens. We're given, and I've had conversations with a mate of mine, his partner actually, that when we sell an Aboriginal artwork from Munkajao or from all the art centres, it's you need to people ask for a certificate, so it has a photo of the person with a story of a small story of where they're from, a photo of them. I mean, it used to be back in the day, them, you know, a person holding up the artwork to say that it's theirs, which it can be pretty awkward, I think. And it's not something that happens with other artworks, you know, like other white artists, or, you know, whatever the other term for that, people who aren't Indigenous are. So
that whole form of, even the form of labelling in itself is a bit kind of, when you point it out to me like that, I just sort of think, well, that's sort of odd, really.
Well, it's still different. It's like maintaining a difference, I think.
But maybe that's because there's so much carpetbagging within your Aboriginal art community.
Yeah.
So
That's where it came from,
such
yeah.
a lack of integrity between.
So it's just
not
solving.
all
It's like a
healers, but
Band-Aid.
Yeah. So there needs to be some type of authenticity or some type of provenance attached to Aboriginal artwork in a different way than outside of it, because it's actually symptomatic of the issues within the Aboriginal art market, or the lack of integrity and people getting ripped off.
Yeah, yeah. And we know that there is, you know, a whole lot of people benefiting out there from Aboriginal art, you know, that are, what did you call it?
The Aboriginal trampoline.
Yeah.
You jump on it for more success in your career.
Yeah, so...
As a non-Aboriginal person. But it goes right through to institutions as well. We still have exclusive, you know, the Aboriginal art section of a gallery. The curator of Australian art doesn't work with an Aboriginal collection. You know, it's how can you curate a premise of a show in any given circumstance within Australia without a voice of an Aboriginal person in it? I think you've already failed. It's like doing a show without having a woman in it. How is that justifiable? How curatorial are you explaining an issue, a premise, a conversation in Australia without that voice? As a curator of any institution, you should be able to work with a collection, not a sub-collection of the collection. And that, I mean, it's... Yeah. The whole institutional framework is so flawed. I mean, and people accept that. They believe that actually, that they should only be working with this area of, a collection, and it's incredibly problematic.
You do that when it's set up as a mechanism to describe Aborigines and not the other way around.
But Trent, like your work, I mean, you truly believe that, you know, these cross-cultural collaborations have something to offer, or like Australia. You know, you write about it in your work. I mean, what do you think it can offer?
Well, I guess I would go back and sort of speaking to what Tony was talking about then. I started exploring this avenue when I was asked to work on a project for a collection of work that was designed to 6 different designers from around the country were asked to explore, I guess, narratives around colonisation or the colonial period. And none of the other designers that were involved or nobody at the time that I got involved was looking at showing or discussing or communicating any, I suppose, Indigenous voice within that narrative. And I couldn't understand at that time how a project which had the potential to be quite significant and quite influential at the time could discuss that period in Australia's history without including that voice. So this is, where my, I suppose, work in this area began, because, I saw it as being important, and I thought that if we were going to discuss this period in Australia's history through this body of work, then we should be including some Indigenous narrative in one of these works. So I started working with Vicky West from Tasmania on a project that told a story about the Eastern Straitsmen, a group of men who essentially ended up with a group of Tasmanian Aboriginal women and had families, and that was, to me, a kind of important microcosm of relationships that were happening around the country at the time. And I began to sort of see that, as my interest in exploring Australian design grew, then I guess any idea of Australian design or any idea of Australian anything should absolutely include, the Indigenous side of that narrative. And
Well, it starts
yeah,
with that
absolutely.
narrative.
So how could I understand what Australian design is without understanding first the Australian design that came before colonisation, and second of all, I suppose the narratives and artefacts that contribute to who we are as a people and the way that we feel ourselves that come from Indigenous culture. So I've endeavoured to collaborate with Aboriginal storytellers, makers, artists, in a way to kind of broaden my understanding and hopefully broaden within the design community the understanding of what it is to be Australian design, because at the moment, until now, Australian design is kind of this it looks more like Scandinavian design or modernist design or design that comes from lots of other parts of the world because it's referencing other parts so strongly, whereas I feel that if there are narratives and artefacts that can influence contemporary Australian design, we can get a sense of what a true Australianness can be that is all inclusive of those two sides of this.
Yeah, well, Australian design is 80,000 years old. As we know, the boomerang has got to be one of the greatest pieces of design, that should be influencing contemporary Australian design.
It reminds me of one of the awkward conversations I had at the Arts Centre. There's been a few, particularly when things start to slow down. I know this lovely lady came in and asked me very earnestly, were the people there carving on baobab nuts before they were carving on boomerangs? And of course, I have no idea. It just seemed like a pretty silly question, but coming from somewhere where people were trying to, she was there. You meet a lot of people. One of them, I went out to.
Oh, so she was a visitor. Now I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming in. Yeah.
She was not a tire kicker. She wasn't buying anything, but she was looking for more significance in her life.
Aren't we all?
Aren't we all? That's how I ended up where I am. But on this couch.
But the awkward conversation didn't help. It was no eat, pray, love conversation for her. But it's interesting what you were saying about Trent about that, because that article last week in The Guardian with Peter Carey was talking about having never written really Indigenous characters into his stories, because he didn't want to offend, he felt like it was completely remiss. But it all boiled down, and he felt like he was perpetuating sort of genocide by not including those characters in his novels and his stories. And it basically just came down to, what we've been talking about tonight, really, which is, just don't be a dickhead. To quote him, don't be a dickhead.
Yeah.
Go out into community and just open yourself up and really don't ask too many questions. But just on that, I'm going to open up to the audience to ask as many questions as you like. We're sort of coming towards the end of this forum. But please, they don't hold back, so you shouldn't either. Andy's walking around with a roving mic.
Hey,
so
on the roving mic.
Hey, there he is.
So if you've got a question, perhaps raise your hand, and Alison, if you want to pick people.
Yeah,
Let's start here.
there's someone up doing
Yes.
I was just interested to hear, particularly with Vernon talking about power inequalities. On opening night, Jim Cathcart thanked the Arts Law Centre of Australia for drawing up the very complicated, apparently, contracts for attributing each of the participating artists for what they did. And I'm wondering how the experience of so-called collaboration paralleled what was written legally. Thank you.
Oh, I wouldn't know. I haven't seen the document.
I wouldn't know either, but I would say being on the board of the Indigenous Art Code and working closely with Arts Law Australia, that it was more about having really good agreements in place with everyone participating, having lots of integrity and transparency, and having everything laid out beforehand, because that's often what's missing in these types of situations, and particularly in cross-cultural collaborations, whether they're at this end, which is very high end, or whether they're at the end of Aboriginal artists working with overseas manufacturers to make tourist items. So often there's no attribution, there's no provenance, there's no deal. There might be like mass licensing of somebody's design and they've got $50 in a packet of smokes. So I think it's more about honouring the agreement with those contracts and really trying hard to do that well.
But also, you know, there's with the art code and you know what we get with arts law in this country in relation to Aborigines, all of the mechanisms to safeguard against exploitation and the mechanisms that offer you know, very basic protections of Aboriginal artists within intellectual property and copyright already exist. It's just that the artists have no idea. And I'm not talking best blackfellas, I'm talking about artists in general.
Actually, they don't exist in terms of if I take your design and just say I make a fake boomerang and I make 20 million of them and I start selling them everywhere. If I don't say that they're authentic, then I'm allowed to do that. It's only if I say they're authentic that I'm in trouble. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So there's a lot of legal loopholes.
But it goes back to the thing about audience, doesn't it? And, you know, I know I'm harping on it. But, you know, isn't it about educating the audience, Bindi, about what to look for the word authentic or to not look for the word, you know, to ask the questions.
It
to
is.
look for the awkward picture on the back of the painting.
But the question wasn't about establishing or identifying authenticity. It was more about protection and safeguarding against exploitation. Yeah.
And part of that is absolutely education, and the other part is legislation. It's got to be two.
They've got to be working together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very dark out there. Anyone else with a question? Here we go, down the front.
Coming to you.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I just want to thank the Art Centre for the exhibition because I've absolutely loved it. And this panel tonight is kind of a piece with it. It's actually really refreshing to see a panel that isn't just like a yes factory about how fantastic we were, and to actually hear some really proper, you know, like some biting debate about it. And that's just fantastic. It takes it to another level, and I'm going to go back in and look at it really differently, so that's fantastic. I want to get stuck into one of the points that has come from Vernon. So first of all, I really thank you for the things that you've thrown up. They're really, really good questions. I think the thing that I can't settle my head on is this whole idea of collaboration and equality. So I'm a filmmaker, I'm a documentary director, and I work in a completely collaborative environment. That's what I've done for 20 years. It is never equal. Collaboration to me never ever means equality. I've never seen a day where in any environment a collaboration has been based on the equality of all the participants. What the work and what it requires determines who gives what, basically. There's a hierarchy to make sure that there's an end result. But in the end, the work itself, the sort of organic needs of the work, determine who gives what. And there's also a political context to that, of course. Who's got the power to give what? When you look at this work, there is obviously a shifting balance in terms of power and who can give what in the production of all of these pieces. And I think that is the point. You kind of referred to that. I don't think it is about how could it be? It's 2017. We all know some of, at least, what's going on in this country. How could it be possibly equal? It's not. There are all sorts of tensions, obvious, in this work, obvious. And the things that you've described, Luiz, about the conditions and the circumstances in which you were working, that seems to me to actually be part of the exhibition.
And that's, I'm wondering, when you look at this work yourself, do you see that? Is that what you want to see? Is that part of what is on display here? And has that been that that imbalance, that inequality, is that part of what you think the point is? And is that front and centre enough, or is there something that we're not grasping about that?
I'm always interested in the sense of engagement that I can see in front of me, and so that's what I will try to look for. How deep is it, or how shallow is it, how rich is it, and I'm always interested in these kinds of engagements. I'm always interested in how successful the outcome is in terms of what you see being exhibited, and and to varying degrees, it always, displays its own sense of success or failure. But it's still interesting and rich in and of itself. And I mean the biggest in my own personal practice. Some of the things that have failed, you can't help but show them because they're worth it, And I think it's all has its own merit in different ways, and it all depends what the audience wants, but it also it depends on what the participants want to do, how much they want to say. It depends on what their motivations are, how far their own sense of self is going to be reflected in the outcome. And it doesn't matter sometimes if the work is good or bad. If those participants' sense of self is there, then it's a success. Yeah. But I take your point about filmmaking. So it's just this issue with collaboration I have, and people have pointed at something and point at things all the time and say they're collaborating, they're doing this and this, and I just think we should remove that word from our general usage.
I think as a nation we just have the most absurd view of what is equality. For me, equality is the acceptance of difference. So the fact that things aren't the same makes them equal. In a very simple way of looking at that, if I had $1 to split between you and me, people would say we get 50 cents each. Does our gender make a difference to that? Does our socioeconomic lives make a difference to that? Does the color of your skin make a difference to that? And the answer is absolutely, it makes a difference to that. And when you look at equality as something of being exactly the same, then and I think that's a big problem we have in this country, is that a Western white ideal of equality is about things being exactly the same, and it shouldn't be thought of like that.
Yeah,
I guess for me,
50 cents goes further in the city than it does in the desert.
It's just that's the question that comes to me when I look at these pieces. Like, I'm instantly thinking about that, and it felt like that was actually part of the point of the exhibition.
Me too. I'm the same. Yeah.
Well, I guess it should be. That's an important part of it. This panel can be considered part of it. Like, whether collaboration is the right word or not, this needs to happen more. We need 100 more success stories. We need 50 more failures. The dialogue of what is happening is so important. Why we've got people lined up on borders? Why do we have certain people that can't marry other people? We are the oldest continuing living culture in the world, and the success of that is that everyone had a space and everyone had a place. We have to start looking at that, and understanding more about how we all live and coexist.
And that's about, like when we talk about, I think what I've certainly learnt from this discussion tonight is that it's about human relationships. It's about different leadership models, if I could just sort of say, because even though we've got this picture that if someone's in charge, that's a bad thing, but there's different leadership models that, that a great leader, and we all know a great leader is someone who's completely in control, but allows the team to be completely purposeful within, it's about the energy that leader is sort of instilling within the team, the vibe. You know, I think that's incredibly important. And there are, you can see different leadership models that still allow for sometimes the big stick to come out and say, this needs to happen and it needs to happen now, like what happens in filmmaking. But that it's all collegiate and still for the work. It's not equal. It's not 50-50, but that's just that can be wishy-washy as well. So is it about leadership?
Maybe that's why they call it in cahoots. Nobody's even discussed that, but that's kind of a whole
conundrum.
Andy's just giving you the mic now.
Do I need the mic?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why they called it in cahoots. I assume that's not collaboration per se. That's kind of like bringing people together and seeing what the hell's going to happen. I don't know. I mean,
I think also that
is cahoots an Australian word anyway? I don't know where that came from. That's probably a cowboy thing, isn't it?
I was wondering that myself, actually.
There you go.
I was just going to say, I think also that working relationships aren't static. So we're sort of talking about this idea that a collaboration or someone taking charge over or being a leader, as we've sort of been discussing, we're sort of talking about it as if it is that way and it stays that way, and as you continue to work with somebody, that model governs that relationship over time. But I think as people work together, there is a chance, or more often than not, that relationship does evolve over time, and things, the only truth is that everything is in flux, everything changes. So that relationship and that interaction will change over time. And I know that within my particular experience in this case, that I feel, particularly in the collaboration or the working together with Johnny Naguda, that's a relationship that I intend to continue with, and that I think over time, where I may have been something, at least I may have been a little more in control of this process until now, and been guiding the direction. I feel like that balance will shift over time, and that there is a movement. It's not a static relationship, that these things change as we continue to collaborate. And the fact that we were given 6 weeks to collaborate, over the space of a year and a half, means that it may have been fairly static for the sake of this project, but I don't know how many others can intend to continue the collaboration. I know I certainly do, and I feel like, given the opportunity to continue that over the years and months ahead, that will evolve over time.
Yeah. What about you, Luiz? Are you going to continue?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I would like to. If this exhibition is exhibited elsewhere, I'd like to maybe continue on with the work with the women, because it feels like it's just a very cursory start, I think, with this. And just thinking about ideas of leadership or ways of leadership or ideas of equity in the process with me being out in the community. I think it was, I was really startled by the living conditions, I guess, and felt that I was coming from a privileged situation. But I think, as the process went on, I felt that was kind of an arrogant assumption on my part, because I felt aspects of my life were much more impoverished than aspects of the people's lives who I've dealt with as well. So, that for me, that equity felt like it was, really quicksand. There were lots of changes and lots of recalibrating that in my head as I got to know the people and their histories and their situations, I guess, as well. So I think, I'd certainly take Tony's point, but, it's that difference, and we kind of accept that difference.
Just back to the Cahoots thing again, it's actually, it's some sort of nefarious activity played out by gang members in the manipulation of others,
Yeah.
or something similar to that.
There was another.
I think that might be a big joke.
We knew we were getting somewhere when Aaron started referring to the term collaboration as the C word.
Yeah.
And we could start swearing at each other.
Yeah, yeah.
There's someone else.
Up the back, Barbara.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a question for Tony. When you was doing the superheroes narrative with the community, did you, like, how much of those superhero stories was actually known on the ground with the community, and how much did you bring in terms of when you relate the Star Wars story? How much was out there already, and how much, like, what greater discussion did you have when they're running around doing these superheroes in terms of how did they relate that then to other superheroes they had in their own cultural stories? Was that a discussion at all that happened, or not really?
It definitely was with the kids, and it was really interesting. I mean, pop culture is so ingrained in that life, let alone community life. But what I love, particularly about there's two series, the superheroes and the Star Wars one. But when you look at Aboriginal mythology and stories and stuff, it's like, is this something from the far future, or is it actually something from the far past? And, you know, creator stories always have elements of superpowers or flight, or, you know, the galaxy in you know, communities I had to work with. You know, people have knowledge, understanding, and paint systems of stars that we can't even see anymore from Earth. It's a knowledge system that is so entrenched in, I guess, oral histories, but understanding of things. I think there's an intrinsic link between them all, which is absolutely, you know, not only really beautiful, but the importance of empowering, of understanding that a super ability doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fly or can see through walls. It's about how you can look after someone or treat someone, or that individually we have you know, our own superpowers. And, you know, the whole, I guess I was in an interesting position that the children were extremely intrigued about having a visitor, wanted to contribute, and that children do play a big role within the Arts Centre at Warrakoona, whether it's in a positive or a non-positive way, because they are banned from the Arts Centre. But inevitably they're in there, and I did, you know, I wanted to engage with the whole community, and that I can say for those works they were self-directed. The children did make all the costumes themselves. They directed.
So they love Star Wars and stuff.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
Insanely. I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean, like anywhere that kids just walk around in superhero outfits, like.
And so, were they surprised that you were willing to engage with contemporary story, like?
I don't know if they.
You know, but do people expect, you know, when they have a visiting artist that you're going to start, you know, with their dreaming stories and their, you know, traditional stories, or is there a value? Did you? Because your work is very contemporary and you value contemporary storytelling.
Yeah.
And so was that completely just natural and embraced by the community?
It's something I try to push a little more, like the UFO story, that I was actually told a story about a UFO, effectively. And I said, oh, this is an amazing story. Like, and I thought it was hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, it happened last week.
It's a traditional story from last week.
I mean, there's things like, you know, Alice Springs has Pine Gap, the CIA are there, and I'm a real buff for that kind of thing. So when people tell me these stories, and why are you not talking about them? Why aren't these stories in your paintings
being
as well?
woven into
they're absolutely fascinating. They're so important. And having the chance to work with communities, I do understand and see a reluctance to talk about these things, particularly with the social and political. There is a fear attached. You know, I worked with the Namatjira family. We just were looking at the big copyright case, health, housing, and there is a fear attached to almost biting the hand that feeds you in a way. And I do try to infiltrate in what way I can and say, you you're an artist.
Tell
You
your
need to
stories.
speak about these stories as well as your traditional stories. But however that happens, it happens. The thing, children are just so amazingly open to those kind of experiences. So that, it did make it a bit easier. And I don't know if we've gone off track with that, but
No, I
think there are a number of different tangents you can bring into the idea of the superheroes, and at the end of the day, it's just dressing up.
And in a funny sort of a
so
way,
cool.
It's a collaboration, isn't it, between the traditional stories, Curtis, and traditional ceremonial practices and things like your work is really kind of a collaboration between the past in a funny sort of a way, but past practices that are continued today, and making contemporary work. The belts, the hair belts, and the blood and things like that. Did you have to kind of how did you feel about those cultural stories and talking to your elders about them, and how did you go about all that?
On my first installation that I did a collaboration with a Melbourne-based artist at the time here for We Don't Need a Map was telling stories around the phone booth, and the phone booth being the central place around the community, and how different people in the community and the region utilize that for their daily businesses, for bringing people up in the hospital or trying to find out where they are, trying to do their banking at a time when there was, no landlines within the community. And those are stories about, contemporary life that is, that I grew up with when I was growing up in the communities, and still remember, those vivid memories from me and from my other family, retelling those stories and joking around. And I think with their hair, I didn't feel. It was first started off by my grandmother, and it was I had I feel really strong ownership because it was my hair that started the first bundle, and then I kept going, and it was just hair that I collected from people who ever went to the hairdresser on Discovery Beach Road, and we still kept going, and that's what came out of the piece, but coming back to the phone booth installation, a lot of the community people and members in Punmu and Wadawurrung were kind of surprised that I'd kind of go down that explore the phone booth more than the other work that I'm known for in the communities. Whereas translating oral histories or Julra Dreamtime stories. But I wanted to kind of make work that represents me and this time in history.
Well, I think on that note, I think we might just sort of conclude the panel. I suppose I should say some closing remarks about what is at stake with cross-cultural collaboration. Well, it sounds to me like, these projects, they really challenge the status quo. It sounds to me like they challenge people's physical capability, they challenge people's egos, they test the boundaries of creativity, and they test the boundaries of human relationships. I remember 20 years ago when I just was still a student at university. I was at design school and I was with an Aboriginal elder, and he was an educator. And he kept talking about these Aboriginal ways of knowing and ways of learning. Like I'm a total concrete courier. I really knew my dad and all my family work at the chemical plant in botany. You know what I mean? So I didn't really know much culturally. It didn't have much cultural education. So I said, what is this business you're talking about with Aboriginal ways of knowing? And he spoke to me about making bread. And he said, you can get together you can follow a recipe and make a perfectly fantastic loaf of bread. You know, if you follow the recipe from A to B, it's a straight line, you'll get a perfectly good loaf of bread. He said, but the Aboriginal way, it's not a straight line from A to B. It's a wavy line from A to B. And it's really about those relationships that you forge along the way, the jokes that you tell, the laughs that you have, you know, everything else that happens around that making of the bread that is more important than the bread itself, but it'll also make the bread taste so good. So I sort of think about that when I think about this kind of work, that, you know, in the end, there are a lot more outcomes that kind of, more than a loaf of bread happens along the way. And so, you know, whether collaboration is not the right word, whether it's more about engagement, just being together, you know, as Luiz kind of pointed out, or where does it sit anyway on that? It's worthwhile thinking about where it sits, Trent, on that scale between just a transaction between two people and true co-authorship. And hopefully we're all moving towards something that looks like that. And we've got people like Vernon Ah Kee who were there telling us what it should look like and, you know, what needs to happen in order for, you know, us to have, you know, more and more projects, like you say, Tony, like this. We can only do it from practice. And maybe it is just about a different set of values at play here, and these values at the heart of the indigenous process, about trust, about honesty, about respect, about time. Maybe they have something to offer all of us in Australia, and all working generally in the space, much more understanding of those values and negotiation and identity. Will there ever be a consensus on all of these issues? Maybe not. But is the arts a litmus test for the state of the nation, or is it a leader? Does it even have to be? Perhaps we've tackled some of these questions tonight, and perhaps we need more experiments like in Cahoots. But what we do know for sure is that the heart of these collaborations is an exceptional willingness to explore, to experiment, and to learn from each other. So on that note, I want you to all join me in thanking our participating artists tonight and the many, 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 many other artists who may not be here tonight from participating art centres. There's just been so many of them. I want you to all please thank them as well for coming together, for pushing the boundaries of what these projects mean for the future. Thanks everyone for being great.